Welcome in, everyone. You're back with the Coach's Corner. First time we have a women's basketball coach on the stage, and it's Coach Dow, and near my hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, down the road in Hammond, USA. Coach, I'm so glad to have you here today. Um, has there been any shock and awe of getting in Hammond and seeing what's around there, the good food?
I really underestimated Hammond. I'm not going to lie to you. In all the years of coming here on road trips, obviously coming from UIW in the Southland, and let's be honest with you, a lot of times on the road, you're hotel to the arena, back to the hotel to the arena, so you don't really maybe get an appreciation for some of these cities that you visit. But I told my wife, the first time I came to visit and went out to dinner with the President Wainwright, and our athletic director, J.R. Teagues. And, she's asking me to take a bunch of pictures. And I said, well, sweetie, it's kind of hard to do that. I said, the best way I could describe Hammond, I said, those movies when you're watching your Hallmark movies all the time, those little fictional small towns. I said, that's Hammond, America, and it's right out of a Hallmark movie. And, I heard somebody say this at a little fundraising or booster event we had a few weeks ago, and said, anybody that you've ever known that spent any amount of time in Hammond, Louisiana, they never have a bad thing to say. They enjoyed their experience here, and it is unique. And obviously I'm well traveled, as a college basketball coach, but we have loved it, and definitely, Hammond has embraced us as well.
And you got great facilities there, but I'll give you a little piece of advice. If you see a store called the Blue Store, go into the Blue Store and get some fried chicken, man.
Okay,
It'll change your life.
I have to look for that.
All right, so let's get into a little bit about your journey. Like, take us back. What first drew you into coaching? And I know you said you had a 37-year career, and fill us in on a little bit about that journey.
Well, it goes back to, I grew up in Medford, Oregon, Southern Oregon, and I knew, of course, in high school, you don't really know how these things are going to happen. I just remember as a player playing high school basketball, I knew I wanted to coach basketball. I had no idea how I was going to go about it. There's no internet or anything like that in 1984, and I was always just fascinated, with the strategy and player development and that type of thing. And even going back a little bit further, growing up in Oregon, of course, that makes me a Portland Trailblazers fan. And they won the NBA championship with Bill Walton and company in 1977, and that obviously, as I guess an 11-year-old kid at the time, really kind of got me passionate and excited about basketball. And then, went to University of Oregon. I mean, I wasn't good enough to play at University of Oregon at 5'8", maybe 5'9", but I still knew I wanted to get into coaching. And my second year of grad school, essentially I volunteered as a graduate assistant for the women's team. I had worked their camps in the summer, and like I said, that was in 1989, and here we are, 2025, and I always kind of joke with people, I'm not sure if I'm qualified to do anything else, because it's all I've ever done is coach college women's basketball. Never high school, never men, and I mean, I've done D1, D2, but it's all I've ever known, and it almost feels like you're not working. It's never dull, that's for sure.
That is true. What about, your early years? What was the biggest lesson that you learned in your coaching career that sticks with you today?
I tell you what, you quickly figure out that, man, you don't have all the answers. I had a very unique experience. I leave University of Oregon, go to Kingsville, Texas, of all places. This is how old I am. It used to be called Texas A&I. Of course, now it's called Texas A&M Kingsville. And literally, my first year there, so this is 1990. I'm 24 years old. I'm making $500 a month, so an annual salary of $6,000 as an assistant coach. And the head coach resigned in the middle of December, and I'm taking over at 24. And there's the old adage about coaching is that you realize when you move over 18 inches on that bench, you learn a lot, and you quickly figure out you don't have all the answers. And I will tell you to this day, I just turned 59, and all these years later, that you kind of have to reinvent yourself a little bit, I think, every couple of years as well too. And I always kind of an apology. I always kind of say that, look, I don't know that I've had an original thought in years, because I'm always copying, stuff from people that I like. But yeah, you do learn in a hurry that you don't have all the answers. And even, like I said, 35 years later, I still don't.
Yeah, we were just talking before we got on air about you said you have to reinvent yourself, about how the changes in college basketball, the recruiting, the roster management. So yeah, I guess you had to go through another major revamp of Coach Dow.
Yes. I mean, I will say, just maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because of having two daughters, at 10 and 13 years old. They probably softened me up over the years, although, maybe our players might disagree with that notion. But there's probably just things over the years that I don't sweat certain things that maybe I did 5, 10, 15 years ago, and just kind of let it roll off me. But and just maybe giving players a little bit more latitude in terms, whether it's shot selection or whatever the case may be. But certainly, as we talked about off the air with the transfer portal, of course, I know that's always, of course, a big topic, but you've got to adjust, how you recruit. And, we talked about this before we came on, that, 2 years ago at UIW are arguably the best Division I team in school history. We win 19 games, most ever. That particular team had 15 players on scholarship, 14 of which we signed out of high school. We had one transfer. And now I don't know if that model exists anymore. It's going to be tough to sustain that for sure.
So biggest coaching influences on your coaching style?
Two guys I would say I worked with very early in my career, Mike Peterson, and he still actually is more or less like a consultant with the Atlanta Dream and the WNBA. I worked for Mike. Well, we met at University of Oregon when I was a GA for the women. Mike was an assistant men's coach at University of Oregon. Lo and behold, 2 years later, he's the head women's coach at New Mexico State. I joined him as an assistant. So I was with him for 4 years, and we probably talked almost weekly, since we stopped working together in 1996. He would certainly be one great, just offensive mind in particular. And then the other guy I would say in particular is Chris Danker. I was with Chris for 2 years at Santa Clara, 3 years at Colorado State. Just again, incredible, basketball IQ, in all phases, offensively, defensively. There's still things that I run, whether it's drills or offense, defense, going all the way back to the time I worked with those guys. So, and they also, I would say, gave me a much better understanding of just how to scout, break down film, obviously everything, looking at tendencies, all the different things that, we always talk about, can you steal a possession or two? I've always said that I think in scouting, you can certainly win. You steal enough possessions, that might make the difference in a close game. And those guys taught me that as well, too.
When you took over at Southeastern Louisiana, what was one of the first things you noticed about the program?
Well, unique, as you said about adjusting. Kevin, we have one returning player. That's it, one. My predecessor, and she did a fantastic job, Ayla Gazzardo, and obviously they won 26 games this past year. They were 19-1 in conference. My final game at UIW was a loss to Southeastern Louisiana, the semifinals of the tournament. But she essentially took the whole roster with her, to McNeese State. Obviously, there was a handful of girls that graduated. So it is literally building it from scratch, from recruiting. The staff is all brand new to me. Obviously, I had people that I knew that I was familiar with, that they were familiar with my assistant coaches. So putting together a staff. But, let me tell you, signing 13 players in April and May is not easy. But at the same time, like I said, building it from scratch. So now this year is really about kind of just laying the foundation of what we want to be about. I always kind of jokingly say, like, don't get me wrong, we want to win games, but as much as making it as well rounded as possible academically and of course in the community as well.
With saying that we needed to bring in 13 ladies, um, how was it recruiting to such a unique place?
Well, it's again, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, to be honest with you. 13 is a big
Yeah,
number, but um, the tough part is, again, call me old school in this. I'm still always going to want to sign high school players. I always, I felt like at UIW, again, that was kind of the core of our program, was girls that were there for 4, some cases 5 years. Um,
hmm
that's tough to do in April. I mean, just the reality is probably 90 to 95% of the high school players are signed. They're already going elsewhere. They signed early. So there's not a lot out there. We were fortunate in our case, Mia Ramos, of course, from Brandeis, right there in San Antonio. She had signed with us at UIW, essentially got out of a letter, if you will, to sign with us
yeah,
now in Southeastern Louisiana, and she's doing fantastic. Plus a young lady from Dallas, Mary Dangerfield, and then another incoming freshman from Israel. So unique, in that regard, and then a wide combination of transfers. We have Division I transfers, junior college transfers, an NEIA transfer who's the benefit. She gets the benefit from the bonus year from having played at
yeah.
NEIA. She gets an additional year, but only Division I. So eclectic, as I describe it, in terms of
Yes.
how our roster is comprised, I
You
should
know,
say.
it's it's kind of interesting whenever you do a total roster rebuild. You know, you're getting to instill some of your things right away.
Right.
So, what are some of the pillars that you're instilling within the program since arriving?
Well, no different than, honestly, what we emphasized at UIW. It just, maybe it hasn't taken place quite as quickly, but, our core values that we talk about in no particular order: accountability, appreciation, competitiveness, enthusiasm, and selflessness. Those are things that, we, as I say, like, it's not just a sign on the wall. Like, you've got to reinforce it every day. And it isn't to say that everything's going smoothly. We had 12 practices this summer, little uneven, but we have 2 former players from UIW that are with me now. Unfortunately, they're dealing with some injuries, so they weren't really, totally involved in our practices. They're trying to help where they can, but so, the reality is, we've got 11 or 12 players that are brand new, to Coach Dow, plus new assistant coaches as well. So it's been a bit of an adjustment, but those 5 core values are something we're going to continue to, reiterate, try to reinforce on a daily basis.
This might actually be a question that you were asked, but well, if a player asks, "What does playing for Coach Dow mean?" Uh, well, how would you answer that?
I mean, I would hope that they would say he's fair. He coaches
Yeah,
us hard, but he's fair. They know, obviously, I have expectations of them off the court. We've talked about that. We want a team GPA to be easily over a 3.0. That was something we were always able to do at UIW. So that's the expectation here. I would think, from a basketball perspective, I mean, sometimes I just try to make it really simple and say, ladies, we only ask things of you that we know you can do. We know you can do them mentally. We know you can do them physically. If you're not a kid that doesn't shoot threes, we're not expecting you to shoot threes, but just do the things that you do well. And again, I know this is very cliche, but, we always talk about, hey, be great at the things that take no talent. It's effort,
Mhm.
it's discipline, being locked in mentally. So I think those are the things that they would say that, Coach Dow emphasizes. And usually the players that buy in everything I just described, they'll find their way in the rotation, one way, or they might not be stars, but they'll find their way in the rotation.
So, what's the first thing that you're looking for when you're evaluating a high school level?
Well, I mean, you got to have obviously a certain amount of skill. Athleticism is great. I referenced Mike Peterson earlier. I said, he had I'll never forget this line. And I shared it with Ray Caldwell, several months ago. And he said, we were talking about a recruit, and I was probably gushing about our athleticism or whatever the case may be. And it's probably 1992. And he said, Jeff, remember, we're coaching basketball, not track. It's basketball. So that's a great point. So you do have to have, obviously, I'm big on being able to knock down threes. I just think that's such a major part of the game that, you might not have an entire roster that can do that, but certain skill set has to be there. At the same time, there's got to be some level of athleticism that will allow them to at least defend. You don't want to have anybody that you think that could be a liability on that end of the floor. And then there's the intangible pieces. Again, probably in my advanced age and years of experience, I've probably become a little less tolerant of certain attributes. If I'm watching you play, and this is always kind of a big part of my speech at the end of every elite camp every summer, and I'm trying to tell these young high school girls, like, look, you got all these college coaches lined up on the baseline watching you play. Don't give them a reason to cross you off the list. Whether it's your motor, body language. How do you react to your teammates, your coaches, the officials? Is there a certain, even keel to your game, that type of thing? And I'm just being very honest. If I have my reservations about how hard you're going to play or how coachable you are, why would I think you're going to suddenly change because you're playing for me? That's a little delusional on my part if I was to think that, I'm going to change her, so those things are important as well, for sure.
All right, so I know that your rathers are to recruit high school, but in this new age of time, how are you balancing recruiting in high school, junior college, transfer portal, bringing overseas?
I will say, like, we actually just talked about this as a staff this morning in terms of our recruiting process and who we're trying to sign. And I was, kind of reiterating, like, guys, we got to make a concerted effort. This is me. Let's sign 3 or 4 high school players in the early period every year if we can. Obviously they got to have a certain standard that they got to meet, how good of players they are and academically and all that. Then in the spring, maybe we kind of fill in the gaps in terms of transfers, or if there's a positional need, whether it's a post or another point guard or what have you. But and again, like I said earlier, eclectic. Be ready to embrace an international recruit, Division I recruit. My personal opinion in Division I women's basketball, I don't know that you can just live entirely off of transfers. I think, to me, at least, I feel like if you sign those 3 or 4 high school girls in the early period, and obviously you hope that you can retain them and they develop, then that foundation is being built. And again, this is not a knock on transfers at all. I don't mean it to come across that way, but there is certainly always going to be a need for transfers, especially at a mid-major.
That's fair. So I'm a big player development kind of guy. Once a player arrives on campus, what's your development process look like for year one?
Well, trying to make them, skill-wise as well-rounded as possible. I mean, I tell our post recruits, when we're recruiting them, said, you're going to be doing the same ball handling drills that the point guards are. You might not be as good at it, but you're going to be doing the same drills. And that's one thing, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes as coaches, you get so caught up in the 5-on-5 aspect of everything that you maybe don't spend as much time as you should. But I've tried to make a more concerted effort over the years to devote, like right now, we're in the 4 hours a week, phase in terms of, and we're still trying to make a concerted effort to, like I said, a lot of skill work. I'm a huge believer in get shots up, get game-like shots up. There's really no substitute for being able to make shots. Just call it like it is. I mean, we can preach defense all we want, but but the ability to take care of the ball, keep the turnovers down, obviously that's your handles. The ability to make shots, and then of course there's the weight room piece of it. We have our players working with our strength coach 4 days a week in some capacity or another. And I think that's something as well that you can, you might not totally, revamp their athleticism, but I think you can certainly make some gains in that area as well.
How this is with younger players. How are you holding them accountable without them losing their confidence?
Well, I would contend that just because you're holding them accountable, like they shouldn't lose their confidence. I mean, I think in some respects, I would say, look, if I'm holding you accountable, I think that you can do whatever it is you didn't do, if that makes sense, and whatever you did incorrectly. That it's something that I kind of, as I alluded to earlier, that hey, I know you're physically and mentally capable of doing it, and I know this is again very cliche, but the old line about hey, when the coaches stop getting on you, that's when you need to be worried. And at the same time, one of the things that I real, especially in those first 30 practices you get before your first game, and whether it's in film or when it actually happens live in practice, I'll say, look, ladies, we did everything right in that possession. Great execution, the screening, the cutting. It was a great shot. It didn't go in, but and again, the process of everything you did was right. It just, the shot didn't go in, and then same thing on the defensive end. You might have a tremendous possession and, the opponent knocks down a heavily contested shot and you did everything right. And so basically I'm going to sound like Nick Saban here talking about the process, but we do try to don't necessarily just fall in love with the end result, fall in love with the process really is what you're trying to instill.
So moving on to X's and O's, what to kind of introduce, Hammond and Louisiana, what kind of style of play do you want Southeastern to be known for?
Well, I think I would always kind of lead. I mean, I am a guy that's known for a lot of set plays on the offensive end, but I'm probably more known for, I hope anyway, like more, hard nosed, tough team to score on. You and I off the air, we're talking about a mutual acquaintance or friend of ours, Aiden Kuntz of the UIW men's basketball staff, and he would refer to it as a Jeff Dow special. We would win a game 52-47. It might not have been fun to watch, but I always felt like, look, if you really defend, rebound, take care of the ball, you'll have a chance. And so I hope we hang our hat on that end. Defensively, offensively, again, I'd love to get up and down the court, but you got to have the players, that can make those kind of plays and make those kind of decisions, in an up-tempo type game as well. Some might say that we're methodical. I'm a big Princeton offense guy. We do some 5-out stuff as well. And again, a fair amount of set plays, but look, I trust me on this. I'm always encouraging, let's get quick shots up, good shots, early in the shot clock. Because I think a lot of times you can get better shots in maybe the first 10 seconds of the shot clock than in any other time. But so
agreed.
It's early right now. I mean, again, we have really essentially 3 players that have yet to even practice, with this, whether because of injury or they just arrived from Israel. So it's a little bit premature to say exactly what our style or team's going to look like, but hopefully we defend. As I always see, defend, rebound, take care of the ball, and a lot of that'll take care of itself.
All right. So within the last 60 seconds, you've talked about defense a few times.
Yep.
Philosophically, what's your approach? Man to man, zone?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's varied from year to year. If you had to put a number on it, I'm probably 75% man, 25% zone. We've run a 1-3-1 zone over the years. Sometimes it's worked better than others. Sometimes it's just, you got to have somebody with length at the top of that zone. The year we went to the NCAA tournament, 2022, when ironically we beat Southeastern Louisiana in the championship game in overtime, we committed to our matchup zone that we stole from Joe Gallo, the men's basketball coach at Merrimack College. So shout out to Joe Gallo. And that's all we ran for the last 5 weeks of the season, 40 minutes a game. And but it was clicking. It worked, and obviously to win 4 games in 4 days, it did its job. So I don't know that I've ever been exclusively, from start of the season to the end, one or the other. Not a huge press guy. I mean, we'll pick our spots, here or there, but I wouldn't say it's 40 minutes of, 2-2-1 press or anything like that. But, maybe with certain personnel groupings and that type of thing.
All right. So upcoming season. What excites you most about the upcoming season in Southeastern Louisiana?
Well, again, as I said, I think I used this term earlier. We're building it from scratch. I mean, we literally are building it from scratch, and so that's exciting. It's a little bit daunting at the same time, but it is exciting. Like I said, I'm being very careful. I know this may sound like coach speak. Look, I'm not predicting anything on X number of wins and all that, and I'm trying to temper expectations in that regard too. But I listen. I said this past year at UIW, this last season, like, ladies, let's just qualify for the conference tournament. If we can get into the top 8, we are living proof of that from 2022 at UIW. That was a team that arguably the worst regular season team that we had in the 6 years that I was there is the team that went to the NCAA tournament. We were 10-17, 10-16 going into the tournament. We win 4 games in 4 days. So the Southland has a history of that, especially in the women's side, that just being the number 1 seed doesn't clinch anything for you. And but if we could be playing our best basketball in February, carry that over into March, I'll take it. We'll give ourselves a chance in that case.
And you just stole my thunder for the next question. So I guess that's how we are measuring success, but beyond wins and losses.
Yeah. I know, as I kind of jokingly say, they keep score. They're obviously they're keeping score every game. And that's a big part of our practices every day. They're virtually every drill we do, there's a winner, there's a loser. Again, going back to that core value, competitiveness. But again, look, I want to win, obviously. But at the same time, I'm also looking at it big picture, with the number of freshmen, sophomores, juniors that we have that we anticipate being in the program for years to come. I know this word gets thrown out a lot, but obviously the culture, piece of that, developing that. A friend of mine is on the men's staff, Kyle Roan, and I came in.
Oh, yeah.
I came in moaning and complaining one day after a bad practice in July, and he said, "Coach, just remember what you said the other day at that basketball luncheon. We had a luncheon in July for both men's and women's basketball, and you said this year is about laying the foundation." I said, "Well, you're right." And he was he used the analogy of your second year. You hope you have some kids that take the sophomore leap. That they might not necessarily be sophomores per se, but they take a big jump, and obviously that's the hope, and of course with skill development and recruiting as well, and that's the plan, and of course not to dismiss the off the court aspect of it as well, in terms of we were very fortunate at UIW. We had 3.66 team GPA in the fall, program high at just things like that. We obviously hope to instill as well too, and then certainly an appreciation for community service or community engagement as well.
Well, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate, and huge thanks to Coach Jeff Dow for coming today on the Coach's Corner. This episode was powered by Affordable Haulers, the Brunch Spot, the Antlers, and the One Eye Network, your home for grassroots basketball truth. And you can go ahead and let Mia know that we're going to be reaching out to her real soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, hey, good luck to you, Coach, and we'll be following.
Thank you. Hey, I hope to see you. We'll be in San Antonio December 31st. We're playing at UIW, so maybe we can catch up before and after the game.
You mark it down. I'll be there.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
All right.